Today, we're going to talk about how to select the best HR technology for your organization. What happens when the very systems that were supposed to create efficiency become these never-ending pain points of disruptive functionality, disparate systems, and impede your ability to provide quick answers to the very people you're supposed to support? To help you decide if it's time for an HR system upgrade, we've called in technology expert Patrick Sayers, president of Newcastle Research. Patrick Sayers is president of Newcastle Research, where he uses his extensive background in market research, consulting, strategic business analysis, and competitive intelligence to select HR technology systems that deliver. So HR teams from 25 to 25,000 can focus on what really matters. Patrick, welcome to Voices of HR.
Thanks, Bert. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, we haven't talked technology yet, so you're the first, and we are so excited to talk to you today because this struggle is real for HR, especially when the very technology that was implemented and was supposed to support them ends up creating these hamstrung HR teams in the process. And I know you shared with us that heads of HR at companies, both big and small, have been voicing their frustration with you, and that one of the hardest parts of their job involves software that they use every day, software that was sold to them as this time saver, this efficiency gain, was supposed to be easy to use. Yet even some of your clients are reverting back to spreadsheets because maybe, for example, their payroll software and their time and attendance platforms can't talk to each other. So although the goal was efficiency and effectiveness, the end result is quite different. So help us unpack all of that. Help us uncover what is actually happening here. Is this just a simple case of technology that's quickly gone obsolete? Are companies overpromising and under-delivering with their technology? Or are there just other factors at play here?
Yeah, no, it's a great intro. So again, thanks for having me. And yeah, the people who come across my desk, as you said, my main goal, Newcastle Research's main mission in life, is to help those organizations choose the best HR technology for them, whether they refer to that as HRIS or Human Capital Management Solution System. Well, first of all, I would say that there are a lot of happy organizations out there who are using, and I talk to them as well. I'm always happy to have those conversations because those are valuable to me as well. Typically, the people who come across my desk are the ones that are unhappy, but I don't want to paint a picture that everyone's unhappy out there. There are a lot of folks that are happy with the solution that they're using, and for me, that's half of it, right? It's half. In order for me to help organizations choose the best system for them, it's helpful for me to understand not only people like them who are unhappy, but also people that are happy, right? And it's not. It goes beyond just the brand that they're using, like the particular HCM vendor. And so just definitions, human capital management, I'll refer to that most often. HRIS, HR technology. There's subtle differences between them, but for the purpose of our conversation, I think we'll treat those synonymously. But so it's not just about picking the right vendor, right? Because I use car analogies a lot because people can relate to that. So it's not as easy as just saying, well, what's the right car to buy? It's like, well, what are you going to do with it, right? Are you camping on the weekends? Are you driving 200 miles a day? Right? Because those are different use cases. But back to what I was saying, it's important for me to understand not just who the organizations are using, whether they're unhappy or happy, but how do they get there? Right. So what questions did they ask along the way? Who else did they consider? Why were they in pain? Right. So it's more than just because there are, for every human capital management vendor out there, the software vendors, the providers, they have happy customers and they have unhappy customers. Right. So it's about finding the right fit. But yeah. And then one other thing that you said, the use of spreadsheets and so forth. So some of the folks who come across my desk, I don't know what number, let's call it half, they're still on a largely manual process. So they've never really had a
Mm.
sophisticated system, a technology system. So they're typically a smaller company. They've grown up. They have manual payroll, some manual timesheets. They use spreadsheets, and so there's those folks who are looking for their first kind of real system, if you will. But then there are others who are on a system that is not working for them for whatever reason. In the scenario that you played out, a lot of them have to use those go-betweens, like an Excel spreadsheet to make those disparate systems talk to each other, right? So you'll have a payroll system and you'll have, for example, a time and attendance system or a performance review system, whatever that is. And so they'll run their time and attendance for the week, and then they got to make that talk to payroll, and sometimes it's not seamless, right? And so then they have the spreadsheets, and then they have to have this go between from a technology standpoint, which causes a whole host of issues, right? I mean, there's time delays, there's manual entry, data mistakes that happen. Compliance issues can arise there if something's missed, right? So there's a whole ripple effect of that, and so yeah, so I covered probably what you asked in a little bit more, but yeah, so those are some of the scenarios that I deal with.
Yeah, and all of those scenarios sound painful if
They are,
they're
yeah,
not working, right?
yeah,
And I guess that's what you do. You come in and you help them figure out how to make all of these systems talk to each other, what other systems they need.
yeah. Sometimes it's making those systems talk to each other, and you're right. It is hard, and I feel like sometimes my job is half technology advisor and half um, therapist almost, right?
Yes.
Because as I said, the vast majority of people who come across my desk, they're in pain, right? Because if you're an HR practitioner, HR manager, director, chief people officer, chief human resource officer, and you and or your team, and sometimes it's a team of one, sometimes it's a large team. If you know your system is not um, as effective, as efficient as it could be,
Hmm.
then you're wasting time, right? And so you have a
Absolutely.
job to do, and the system is supposed to be helping you do that job effectively. If it's not working efficiently, if it's not working effectively, that creates more work for you. And then at some point you might recognize that, okay, we need to make a change, right?
Hmm.
But then you have another job on top of that still, which is to
Yeah.
look for a new system. And so what a lot of folks do is they do nothing and they just
Hmm.
suffer, right? And because they don't, and it's not because they don't know they need it. I think a lot of times they intuitively know that they need it. It's just they don't have time to look, right? Because it's hard. And I'm not saying that because it's built a company around it.
Hmm.
It's hard. I mean, there are literally hundreds of options out there, and so
Hmm.
it's a full time job for me to keep up with all those things. But if you're using this, they're HR Bob or Betty, they're paid to use the system, not to look for a new
Hmm.
system, right? And so that's my
Right.
job. But it's rewarding because it's if you can help somebody kind of move a little further down the path and get to a place where they're a bit more sane. That's always fun.
Yeah, because I have never heard of any HR department being overstaffed,
Right?
right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. It's not like
it
they're
just
just sitting
doesn't
around
happen.
doing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They're usually the ones that are understaffed, overworked, systems
Yeah.
aren't working, very frustrating. People are asking them questions, every hour, every minute, and they're frustrated because they can't serve um, their internal company partners
Yeah.
as effectively as they'd like. So you've talked about the individuals, the HR practitioners who have systems in place and maybe they're not as cohesive or talking to each other. You have the ones where the 1% where it's all working fine.
Mhm.
And then we,
Oh,
we
and
have
again, to be
some.
clear, that's just the 1% that comes across my desk. It's probably a much
Sure,
higher percentage that are happy out there.
sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. But then you also have those individuals who haven't even really started. They're maybe in a growth mode. They're thinking about their systems. So now let's take a top down view. And what systems are you seeing that are trending that HR practitioners are looking for as they think about the next, let's say, 1 to 5 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, my view of the world is probably biased because it's the folks that come across my desk. Um, I would say, have a recognition that they need help. And it all goes back to the pain points. So the biggest pain points that we see are customer service, disparate systems, right? Which one of your questions touched on earlier, the need to go from your time and attendance to your payroll through Excel, for example, or some spreadsheet, right, to make that work, right? So disparate systems and all the ripple effect that can cause, um, just blatant missing functionality, right? Like we don't have a way to do performance reviews, like during COVID, when that started got up and running. A learning management system, became paramount because all of a sudden a lot of these companies had 60% or 100% of their workforce was now remote, right? And so we don't have we don't have training sessions in our break room and in our in-house auditorium. We have them remotely. We need a system for that, and so that needs to tie in, things like that. So yeah, and ease of use, something isn't easy to use. So those are the pain points, and then from that, the trends that we're seeing is people, at least the folks that I work with, because one of the things I do with them is, and we could talk about this, is really get them to focus in on what is your pain point and don't lose sight of that through your process. Because what happens a lot is a lot of folks, they start to talk to vendors and it's the shiny toy and it's this and that and this, and they lose sight of why they began the process in the first place.
Sure.
But yeah, so some of the trends, a unified system. I think people are increasingly seeing the value in a unified system. I think people are increasingly seeing the value in weighting heavily in their search customer service, right? Because things change, right? Congress will pass a law, something will change, your state will pass a law, there'll be some compliance change that you need to now adhere to, and you need your system to keep pace with that, right? And so there's always some kinks to be worked out, and it's regardless of what technology you're using, whether it's your iPhone or your Samsung, whatever you use for a phone, like they make updates and then they make bug fixes, so there's nothing is going to be perfect, and you're going to need customer service at some point. And I think oftentimes people come to me the second time around, right? So they have a system. They launched a new system 2 years ago, 18 months ago, whatever it was. It's not working well. And so then they need help. And so they're recognizing, because I coach them through, like, well, why are you in pain? What is it specifically about this? And sometimes it's not readily apparent, right? So they say, well, our customer service, for example, is spotty. It's inconsistent. And I was like, okay, well, or they say, like, we hate our customer service. And I said, well, what about the customer service? Can you get them? Is it response time? No, they always get on the phone. It's just inconsistent, right? So I dig a little deeper, and it's, you know what, when we call them and ask about payroll, they're great. They know that inside out. But when we call and ask about time and attendance, they have no idea. Like it takes 4 times as long to get an answer around time and attendance or talent management, when we have issues in there. So then I talk to them about, well, actually, that's a symptom of an underlying problem, which is that vendor that you're using uses a partner for that particular module. And so they don't know that as well. And so sometimes they know that, they just didn't connect the dots. And sometimes they didn't actually know that, right? Because the salesperson that they worked with just kind of quickly glossed over that. And so customer service in that example is the symptom, but the underlying problem is the architecture, that those disparate systems. Because even if it's through one vendor, like you have a relationship with one human capital management HRIS software vendor, doesn't mean that the systems underneath are unified, right? Because they could be partnering, they could have acquired something, and so that's one trend, customer service, or 2 trends, I guess. Customer service, not losing an eye on that, keeping your eye on the ball regarding that and weighting that. And then the other one is unified systems. Those are probably the biggest 2. Almost always customer service is up there, if not number 1 in terms of pain. And then we get on to the process, and I work with them and we evaluate their needs, their must-haves, their nice-to-haves, and I help them go through that and develop that list and help them develop the business case for the CFO. We do all that, and then a couple weeks later, we're talking, and they put a list in front of me of like their must-haves and their nice-to-haves, and I say, well, wait a minute, where is customer service, right? because 2 weeks ago you mentioned that was your number one pain point. That's why you're losing sleep at night. Like, and it's not here, right? And
The
they're like,
kitchen sink effect. I
yeah,
love it.
but I let them off the hook pretty quickly because it's because I have a lot of these conversations. I've noticed that, and not just in this business that I'm in now, but just throughout all my career, people tend to quantify or they tend to overweight what they can easily quantify, right? So price is easily quantifiable, right? Functionality is relatively easy to quantify once you've determined what your needs are. Do they have it? Do they not have it? You can check the box, right? But customer service, right, that's tougher to quantify because every single vendor that they sit in front of are going to tell them that customer service is their number one priority, right? And so how do you grade that, right? Because they'll put customer satisfaction metrics in front of them, net promoter score, CSAT scores, and those are important. But I always remind customers to take a step back and look at what those numbers actually are, right? Because it's, let's say they have 95% customer satisfaction, right? Well, that's great. And that's better than 94, right? But how many people filled out that survey, right? So maybe 40%, of their customer base. So, okay. So that means that 40% of their customers really like them. Well, what about the other 60%? How do they feel, right?
Yeah.
So a little quick and dirty tip I give them is to use customer retention metrics, because that will capture the whole customer base, which is true of any recurring business, whether it's Netflix selling you video movies or subscription, or a human capital management software vendor selling you software as a service. Their mission in life is to keep you as a customer, which is good. That's actually mutually beneficial. They want to keep you as a customer, and you actually want to stay, right? Because that means you're happy. And so judge them on the thing that they're trying to do, which is keep you, right? So year in, year out, how many customers are they keeping? And the example I always give when I talk to customers about this is again, I use car analogies a lot because people can relate to that. If your neighbor across the street is on their fourth Toyota Camry or, fifth Ford F-150, you don't need to ask them if they like that vehicle. Like, they keep buying them, right? So it's so
it's a given.
Yeah. So there is an enormous, very high correlation between customer retention and what I know of people's, because I have hundreds of these conversations a year, of organization satisfaction with customer service. You don't keep, let's say 95, 96% of your customers, which is high in this space. And that's leading in this space without keeping your customers happy, right? And so anyway, that's a quick and dirty tip, for people walking away. If you're evaluating vendors, ask them about their customer retention numbers.
So just to kind of wrap this up, this part, any potential software vendor who says they have best-in-class customer support, the best way to find out is the retention number.
And by the way, not all vendors disclose that number. Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 to 75% of the vendors out there do. The publicly traded ones, they're not required to do it, but you can often find that in their 10K. And I'm very candid with senior leadership at some of these vendors who don't disclose it, that it's a red flag, right? Basically,
I was going to say, if you aren't, then you have something to hide. Because if it's 95%,
if it's 95, 96%, you're disclosing that, right? So there's a reason.
Absolutely.
And so I had a candidate, I've told this joke on webinars and conferences and stuff before. So forgive me if you've heard it, or some of your, the people tuning in. But I had a conversation with a senior. He was a CFO. He said, "Well, we're not publicly traded. We're not required to disclose that, so we don't." And I said, "Well, I'm not required to brush my teeth, but I still do, right? It's still a good idea." And he didn't like that. But actually, it's interesting because I don't believe even if you are publicly traded that you're required to disclose it. But it's
sure.
But anyway, so it's a red flag if they don't.
Absolutely.
That's my opinion.
All right. So you just referred to talking to the C-suite, and I suspect, there's a lot in the HR audience are saying, you know what, I get it. I know I need to revisit our technology, but I'm overworked already, as you referred to. And now I'm going to initiate more work by conducting a search. I don't have time for this,
Yeah.
but they know that they need to do it.
Yeah.
So how do you help them create the case
Yeah.
to take then to the C-suite to make the case for more technology or different technology?
Yeah, there's two buckets, or different technology or technology, right? If they're using paper
Yes,
today, because
right.
I had a conversation last year, just to everyone likes stories, as you say. It was a chief human resources officer that was my main point of contact. So they were on board. They not on board, but like they recognized that they needed something, and the CFO just didn't. And so we got on the phone, and the CFO was like, "Well, that's free for us today. Like we use Excel spreadsheets for that." And I said, "All right, well let's examine that." And I said, "Yes, you use Excel spreadsheets for that, and that technically is free because you're paying for it anyway, right?" I said, "But how much time are you spending doing that every
Mm-hmm.
week?" And the CFO said, "Well, 30 minutes." And I was like, "Okay." I said, "You're the CFO. You're spending 30 minutes a week on that." I said, "How about your team? What would you estimate?" They said, "Yeah, all in, probably a couple hours, right?" And so then I flipped over to the HR person. I said, "How much time is your team spending, in Excel
Mm-hmm.
spreadsheets every week to make these disparate systems talk to each other?" It was like 8 hours, right? Whatever it was, I forget what it was.
Yeah.
And the light bulb went off with the CFO even before I got her there, and she said, "That's not free." And I said, "That's not free."
Yeah.
Right? You really have.
Not
So that's
free.
part of it. And I have kind of a framework. I actually have it up here because I'm working with a client on this right now. In terms of just their search, I really try to help them develop a short list of vendors that make sense for them. That's
Mm.
typically what an engagement with me looks like. If it's a formal engagement, right? If it's an informal, just phone call, I'm just happy to have those. Because that benefits me and them. So, but yeah, the search itself, that's as I said, when we talked about the trends, the customer service, the disparate systems, I try to always have them keep sight of why they're in pain today throughout the process, and don't
Mm-hmm.
lose sight of, or don't get distracted by the bells and whistles throughout the process, because it happens, right? People get in there,
Mm-hmm.
and as I said, people tend to, myself included, everyone in all, regardless of what decision they're making, they tend to gravitate toward things that they can measure, right? And that's
Mm-hmm.
price. And oh, gee, they both can do payroll, and they both can do, or all three vendors that we're looking at can do this, and they can check the box in time and attendance. But this one has surveys, and this one doesn't. So that's a difference, right? And so they instinctively want to weight that heavily because it's easy for them to measure that. And so we get to the end of the process, like, well, yeah, they don't have survey. Like, do you care about surveys? No, not really. But but they've weighted it heavily in their search because it's quantifiable. But
Right.
yeah, the other element is helping that human resources professional make the case. And I have it up in front of me because, as I said, I happen to be working on this for another client. Um, so it's identifying areas of potential cost savings. I kind of break it out into four parts. Payroll errors, that has a direct and indirect cost savings,
Mm.
right? So if you can reduce payroll errors, that's a hard and soft savings right off the bat. And I could share metrics. And actually, if anyone tuning in, and we could talk about how to engage with me at the end if they're interested. I actually have a kind of a one pager I send to people that will outline this framework. But I'll give you a quick
Mm.
overview today because I actually do talks just on this, so I could talk for an hour just on this. But
Sure.
productivity and self service, that's a big one. So for example, if somebody on the front lines, meaning on the manufacturing floor, or a nurse, whoever it is, or retail, someone clocking in, clocking out every day, if they're calling every time they have an issue around their vacation time, for example. In other words, if the system doesn't make that easy for them to do themselves, then that's taking that HR practitioner's time. And
Mm-hmm.
if you multiply that by a significant number of employees, that could be all their time, right? It's just
Right.
fielding these requests. And so quantifying that, going to the CFO, and I help people, like, give them a worksheet and walk through that with them and say, okay, if you can eliminate 50% of that time, just 50%, how much time is that
Mm-hmm.
going to save you in a given week? And how much does that cost for the company, right? And it adds up very quickly. So there's a mix of hard savings and soft savings, I call them. But
Mm-hmm.
another one is consolidation, right? And so if they're trying to get on a unified system because it will just make their lives easier, the workflow, they don't have to go into Excel spreadsheets, that type of thing. That's going to save them time, because they're not working with different systems. They're not spending time each and every week just making these systems talk to each other, which is a hard and fast saving right there.
Sure.
But in addition to that, just consolidating systems can sometimes just be a hard savings, right? So if you're using a different vendor for payroll, a different vendor for time and attendance, different vendor for all of your talent management needs. It could be, and I'm just making up numbers. Maybe you're paying $10 per employee per month, just to use round figures. Let's say you're paying $10 per employee per month for each of those modules, right? Maybe that add-on for a unified system, maybe the core is $10 per employee per month, but maybe the time and attendance is a $5 per employee per month add-on. Maybe the talent management is a $5 per employee per month add-on. So just moving to one system, and I don't want to guarantee this for anyone because we really got to dive into what people's needs are. There might be a reason for them to use those disparate systems, and we can talk about that. But sometimes just consolidating is a PEPM savings in and of itself, right? And then the last one I talked to them about is compliance, right? And that's kind of the big scary one because it's tough. It's tough to quantify because it's kind of an unknown, and sometimes that one's the biggest, scariest one for the CFO by itself. If for their human resources director, or chief human resource officer, to come to them and say, we really don't have a good handle on this. Like if we get audited because of how we're capturing time and attendance, and whatever the case may be, sometimes they're like, yeah. Let's look into that. Yeah. I just don't want that big scary bill from the government, right? So, but those are kind of the four areas, and as I said, we could probably talk for an hour just about that. But that's the framework that I give them, and that's not something I like. If you look at Newcastle Research's site, that's not really something that I put on the hang on the shingle, if you will. But it is a heavy component of every engagement, just a kind of an added benefit to say, okay, let me hit. And sometimes, honestly, like that conversation I mentioned, with the Excel spreadsheets with the CFO, where kind of like a light bulb went off. The human resource director called me afterwards and said, I have been saying exactly that for the past 6 months. Like, what? And I was like, I know, I get it. Like, it's just sometimes they just need to hear it from someone else.
They do.
And I don't know why it shouldn't be that way, but sometimes they do. Sometimes, and that's nothing against CFOs but sometimes they just need to hear it from an outside perspective.
Well, right? There's so many conversations that they have every day, and they're constantly reprioritizing.
Yeah.
The money coming in, the money going out, where are they reinvesting? Yeah. I guess something that you said before, though, I think lends to a question around risk. And I suspect that you go into organizations and you actually help them identify maybe where the gate has been left open a little bit too far and they aren't adhering, and identifying those risks for them. Would that be the case?
The short answer is yes, I do that. Not typically because that's a much bigger engagement, and I tend to move customers away from that because most of the time they don't need it, right? Most of the time they just need some guidance. They're entering the forest and they have no idea what to do, where to go. And I'm like, don't go that way, go this way, right? So they just need some high level, because they do. These people are smart, right? You don't get to be running an HR organization without knowing what you're doing, right? It's just searching for, as we talked about before, searching for a new system, searching for a new vendor. It's just a different job, right? I'm not smarter than they are. It's just I wear a different hat in the process. They don't have time to sift through all these hundreds of companies and sift through all the demos just for fun and be up to speed on all of this stuff, because it's not their job, right? Their job is to use the system. My job is to understand the ins and outs, the pros and cons of all these systems, and where they're best suited, right?
Well, and the beauty of it is someone like you doesn't have any skin in the game except to make sure that they get what they need, right?
Yeah, and that's actually a good point. By design, Newcastle Research is independent. We don't accept any commissions from human capital management vendors.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, if the customer wants me to, I make an introduction. And if they don't want me to, to the extent they want to make sure that we're completely independent, I'll give them a short list that I think will make sense. And I'll say, contact them, don't contact them. I'll have no way of ever knowing.
I think it's important for our listeners to understand what the different roles are that people can play, that consultants can play in this very seemingly complicated process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So at the end of every podcast, we ask these questions called rapid fire questions so that the audience gets to know you a little bit more.
Perfect.
Are you ready?
I am.
Okay. What's your favorite productivity hack for HR professionals?
Productivity hack. Again, I'm going to be, they're rapid fire, but I'm going to take my time to think about it. It's not really a hack, but it's just, I guess, raising your hand and getting some help. If you have a system today that's not working for you, kind of, the old phrase, recognizing that there's a problem is the first step, right?
It is.
Because I've had HR folks that I've been talking to literally for years, right? And I just check in with them now and again. I'm like, hey, how's it going? Yep, you're still on those 10 systems that don't play nicely with each other, but they just don't have time, right? And so it's not really a hack, but just if you're in a situation that isn't working for you because you've outgrown the system, because there are too many systems, or for whatever reason, it seldom gets better, right? And so just you gotta bite the bullet and just, even if it's not a complete rip and replace, just start the path down to making that better, right? And use people like me. I know it's easy for me to say because that's what I do for a living, but honestly, even if, and I've told people this, like HR practitioners that I've been talking to for a while, I'm like, even if you don't use me, like go find somebody to get, hey, like I just want to send you a Christmas card and know that you're not in pain, right? So it's not really a hack, but just if you know the system's not working for you, you gotta do something about it.
All right. What are some bad recommendations you hear in your profession or area of expertise?
I don't want to say bad recommendations, but I think you got to be careful about who you ask for advice from. That's one. We already covered that a little bit. Just make sure that there's no conflicts of interest. That's one. I would say going it alone is fine if you have some experience and you've used a bunch of systems. But just because something works for somebody else or something because people, so it's not really bad. It's a good check. To make sure that to use the online review sites as kind of a sounding board. But what I always, so that would be number one. That would, if you want one clean answer, their online review sites they serve a purpose, but it's kind of a one size fits all, right? And to use a car analogy, right? It's, well, should I get a Jeep Wrangler? Are you going camping? Great, right? That's a fantastic vehicle for that. Nothing against Jeep Wranglers. If you're commuting 250 miles a day, that's not the right car for you, right? The road noise is high, the gas mileage is not great, right? So whereas if you're, commuting that far every day, maybe an electric vehicle, you're only going to see highway miles, right? So both of those are great vehicles, right? But not for the same purposes, right? And so, and sometimes those review sites don't capture that. So have a conversation with somebody like me who can provide some context, and help you walk through that. That would be not really bad advice, but that would be the number one of the big mistakes that I see people make is they just ask their neighbor, like, well, who do you use? You might not look like them, right? They work for a healthcare facility and you're a manufacturing facility. Like those are not the same, right? Just be careful about using general review sites is a big piece of advice. What
is the title of the best book you've ever read and why?
It's up there. It came to my, it's an obscure one probably for most of the audience. Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman. It's, I don't know if you know, Richard Feynman was a Nobel winning physicist, but it's just some weird, quirky it's a collection of a bunch of little adventures that he had. So that was a fun one. I think it provides some insight into kind of the behind the scenes of a probably a field that people don't normally come across. So that's probably the why. But I'm
Sure.
also not, not beyond just, a Dan Brown page turner as well.
Absolutely. Suspenseful.
Exactly.
Where can people go to learn more about you?
Yeah, NewcastleResearch.com is place. But yeah, probably the best place is just to shoot me an email, patrick.sayers@NewcastleResearch.com, or find me on LinkedIn. I'm the president, so I'm pretty easy to find. Newcastle Research, Patrick Sayers. Yeah, so those would be probably the top three.
Perfect. Well, today we have been joined by Patrick Sayers, president of Newcastle Research. Thanks again for joining me, Patrick. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. Enjoyed it.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks so much for watching. We would love it if you shared your thoughts on any of the topics we discussed in the comments below. And if you got value from the video, it would mean the world to us if you hit the like button and subscribe to the HRMorning channel. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Voices of HR.